Beneath the refined marble halls of Monticello, the crown jewel of Virginia's plantation aristocracy, there was a space that never appeared on any official diagram. No guide pointed to it. No blueprint acknowledged it. No historian dared describe it. And yet, for nearly 40 years, between 1773 and 1819, that hidden room held a secret so corrosive that revealing it would have cracked the very foundation of America's self-crafted mythology. The room measured 14 feet by 12, modest by any standard. A single narrow window faced the servants' quarters, positioned deliberately so no visitor strolling the manicured grounds would ever glimpse the woman imprisoned inside. The walls were simple plaster, the furnishing sparse, a bed, a chair, a table, nothing more. But the room's true function wasn't comfort. It was containment. Because inside that space lived a woman who carried within her the most dangerous truth Thomas Jefferson ever created. A woman who bore him children he would never publicly claim. A woman who existed at the intersection of forbidden bloodlines, a national hypocrisy. Her name was Sally Hemings. Though Jefferson never wrote it in any personal letter, never acknowledged her in any diary, never allowed her presence to stain the immaculate version of himself he prepared for the world. For decades, generations of Jefferson descendants, white descendants, would edit, deny, distort, and outright destroy any evidence suggesting she had ever been more to him than property. But before the lies hardened into tradition, before the silence became official history, before the room itself was forgotten under soil and shame, there was a beginning. Unlike most beginnings in early America, it started with power. The illusion of enlightenment. In 1773, Albemarle County looked like the promise of a rising nation. Rolling green hills, fertile tobacco fields, and elegant plantation homes carved from enslaved labor. It was here that a 30-year-old Thomas Jefferson brought his new wife, Martha Wales Skelton, to the unfinished estate he called Monticello, Italian for Little Mountain. Jefferson imagined it as his personal temple of enlightenment, a sanctuary where architecture, philosophy, and reason could coexist in perfect harmony. He obsessed over every detail. The angle of sunlight through skylights. The symmetry of rooms. The secret staircases built so enslaved servants could appear and disappear without ever interrupting. The illusion of refined gentility. He wanted a home where the machinery of slavery would remain invisible while he entertained European ambassadors with speeches about liberty. The hypocrisy wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was engineered. Monticello was a stage. And Jefferson was its playwright. The woman brought into the shadows. Martha brought with her something Jefferson valued even more than her companionship. 40 enslaved human beings inherited from her father. Among them was a girl, Sarah Corp, and Sally, just 14 years old. She was Martha's half-sister, the daughter of John Wales, and an enslaved woman named Elizabeth Hemings. White Virginia society never acknowledged this openly, but everyone understood the arrangement. Men like Wales regularly fathered enslaved children. The contradiction wasn't shocking. What was shocking was how meticulously families tried to erase any trace of it. At Monticello, the Hemings family held a strange liminal status, privileged compared to field laborers, trained in domestic skills, multilingual, educated, and often tasked with serving Jefferson's family directly. They were still property. But they were property that carried the blood of the owners. Nothing could be more American than that contradiction. Martha's slow death and the quiet shift of power. Over the next 9 years, Martha bore 6 children, her body breaking under the repetitive strain of pregnancy. Monticello's construction halted and resumed in rhythm with their health rooms remained half-finished, wings redesigned, corridors appearing on one plan and vanishing on the next. Jefferson's grand vision blurred under the weight of domestic tragedy. By 1782, Martha was dying. Her death shattered Jefferson. He locked himself in his room for weeks, wandering the grounds in a trance, refusing food, refusing comfort. In a final private moment, she made him promise something that would define the next 40 years of Monticello's history. Never remarry. He agreed. And he kept that promise literally. But emotionally. Morally. Physically. He found his substitute almost immediately. Because in the silence Martha left behind, Sally's role began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, because quiet transitions are the ones most easily denied later. By the time Jefferson left for Paris in 1784 as the American minister to France, the invisible machinery of the household had shifted around Sally in ways no official record would ever acknowledge. And when Sally later boarded a ship for Paris, now 19 years old, responsible for escorting Jefferson's young daughter, it wasn't an accident. It was arrangement. Calculation. Preparation. Paris promised something Jefferson hadn't anticipated. French law considered any enslaved person who stepped onto its soil automatically free. What happened next? The negotiation, the pregnancy, the return to Virginia, the creation of that hidden room would shape the next 4 decades of Sally's life and the next 2 centuries of American myth-making. Monticello looked like a monument to reason. But beneath it, literally beneath it, was the room built to hide the truth. Room designed so the world would forget the woman inside. Room that tells us more about Thomas Jefferson and the country he helped invent than any soaring words etched into marble. And this is where our story begins. When Thomas Jefferson arrived in Paris in 1784 as American minister to France, he stepped into a world that perfectly flattered his self-image. The salons were filled with brilliant men who spoke of philosophy, liberty, and the rights of man as if history itself were theirs to redesign. The streets hummed with ideas that would soon explode into revolution. Paris in the 1780s was everything Jefferson liked to think he was: enlightened, rational, progressive. It was also the place where the contradiction at the center of his life sharpened into something he could no longer pretend not to see. In Paris, Jefferson was not just a plantation owner. He was a representative of a young republic built on claims of universal rights, while personally owning human beings whose labor funded his lifestyle. The distance between his words and his reality did not shrink in Europe, it widened, and into that widening gap stepped a young enslaved woman who, on paper, was his property, but under French law had a legal status he could not fully control. Her name was Sally Hemings, and when she boarded the ship to France in 1787, she was about 19 years old. The crossing Jefferson had already been in Paris for several years, having brought his eldest daughter, Martha, with him earlier. His younger daughter, Polly, remained in Virginia, too young to make the journey alone. By 1787, he decided she should join him. Someone had to accompany the 8-year-old across the Atlantic. The choice was not random. He chose Sally. She was literate. She understood household routines at Monticello. She was connected to the family by blood, even if that fact was never spoken in public. She could be trusted, not in the sense of free choice, but in the sense that enslaved people had no power to refuse. On paper, this was a simple logistical decision: send a reliable servant to escort a child. In reality, Jefferson was importing into Europe not just a domestic worker, but a woman whose very presence exposed the rot beneath his polished ideals. The journey from Virginia to France took around 7 weeks. For most of that time, Sally and Polly were trapped in a confined, male-dominated environment that blurred distinctions between servant, property, and escort. At sea, the categories that governed plantation life loosened slightly. Everyone depended on everyone else not to die. But when they stepped off the ship in France, hierarchy snapped back into place. Only this time the legal framework was different. In Virginia, Sally was human property. In France, she was not. The law that changed everything under French law at the time, any enslaved person who set foot on French soil could claim freedom. That was not a vague aspiration or philosophical slogan. It was a legal fact. There were black communities in Paris, former slaves, free-born Africans, mixed-race people who knew this law, lived by it, and advised others of their rights. This meant that the moment Sally Hemings arrived in France, she had something she had never possessed before: leverage. The irony was brutal. Jefferson had crossed the ocean to represent a republic built on the declaration that all men are created equal, while technically bringing along people who, under that very nation's laws, were considered his property. But France did not recognize that claim. His servants could walk away. They could stay in Paris, seek protection, and live as free people. For a man obsessed with control, that reality was not a minor detail. It was a direct threat to the order he had constructed around himself. Sally would have learned this somehow through other black people in Paris, through whispers among staff, through the simple fact that she was treated differently by law than she had been in Virginia. Whether Jefferson explained it to her or she figured it out from others doesn't change the core truth. For the first time in her life, she had a choice that was not entirely scripted by someone else. And that is precisely when Jefferson's relationship with her became something he could no longer reframe benevolent, a relationship without the possibility of consent. The time Sally became pregnant in Paris, the power imbalance between her and Jefferson was absolute. He was in his mid-40s, a famous American, respected in European circles as a philosopher and statesman. She was a teenager whose entire life had been lived under enslavement, whose mother, siblings, and extended family was still owned by the man now sharing her private space. Calling what existed between them a relationship is already a distortion. Consent is impossible when refusal is not safely available. Sally knew that returning to Virginia meant returning to bondage. She also knew that, if she stayed in France, she would be free, but her family back in Virginia would remain enslaved, and Jefferson would still own them. He could sell them. He could retaliate against them. He held all the real power, even on French soil. Years later, her son Madison Hemings would recount what his mother said about that time. According to him, Sally made a bargain with Jefferson. She would return to Virginia with him, relinquishing her chance at legal freedom, if he promised that their children would be freed when they reached adulthood. It was a calculated negotiation for the future of people who did not exist yet, made by a woman who had almost no bargaining power except one: the threat of staying in France and exposing the situation to people who would not be amused by a liberty-loving American diplomat impregnating a teenager he had enslaved. Whether Jefferson literally phrased it as a contract, whether every detail happened exactly as Madison later remembered, is not the point. The point is that Sally clearly believed she had extracted a promise, and that Jefferson's later actions support that belief. The two sons he freed in his will, and the informal freedom granted to others, aligned very closely with what Madison described. Sally's choice was not between freedom and slavery. It was between her own freedom now and the possibility of freedom for her children later. It was a choice made in the shadow of coercion, with her entire family's fate hanging in the balance. That is not consent. That is survival. The return to the cage in 1789. As France lurched toward revolution, Jefferson's time in Paris ended. He headed back to America, back to Monticello, back to a plantation that depended on enslaved bodies to support his intellectual life. Sally returned with him, pregnant with his child. On the ship home, the reality she faced was stark. In Paris, she had been a legal person. In Virginia, she was property again. The law that might have protected her in France evaporated the moment she stepped onto American soil. Whatever informal deal she had made with Jefferson was worth only as much as his conscience and self-interest allowed. When she walked back into Monticello, she did so not as a free woman, not as a partner, not even as a recognized concubine. She returned as an enslaved teenager carrying the child of the man who owned her. This was the context in which the hidden architecture of Monticello took on its full meaning. The house as a machine for hiding Jefferson did not redesign his house after Paris to accommodate his new reality. He had already built it with secrecy in mind. Monticello's layout was not accidental. The dependency's low-service wings, built into the hillside on each side of the main house, were carefully designed to conceal the movement and presence of enslaved people. Narrow passageways allowed servants to move unseen. Dumbwaiters delivered wine from the cellar, so no enslaved waiter needed to appear during refined dinners. Hidden staircases connected the public rooms above to the service areas below. The entire system was engineered to maintain one illusion: that the genteel life of the master class existed independent of the people who made it possible. Into this system, Sally was inserted with ruthless precision. Her room was located in the South Dependency, close to Jefferson's private quarters, accessible through those same concealed passages. To visitors, the main house was a space of philosophy, books, inventions, and polite conversation. They would never see the cramped chambers dug into the earth, where enslaved people slept, worked, and gave birth. By the standards of enslaved housing, Sally's room was better than most: solid walls, a window, proximity to the main house, a level of privacy others did not have. By any human standard, it was a cage, not because of its size or decor, but because of its purpose. That room existed so she could be near enough to Jefferson to be available and far enough from his white guests and family to remain invisible. The architecture did the moral work for him. A child born into Silent Sesame around 1790, Sally gave birth to her first known child by Jefferson. The infant died in early childhood, and here the silence becomes louder than any written record. Jefferson was a meticulous record keeper. He logged births of enslaved children, crop yields, weather patterns, financial details. He could record the growth of a plant or the arrival of a calf with clinical precision. Yet this child, his own, does not appear in his farm book. No name, no date, no notation, nothing. That absence is not an accident. It's a deliberate erasure. The same man who tracked enslaved people as assets with their birth years and values somehow could not find the ink to record the existence of the child he fathered with an enslaved woman in a room that didn't officially exist. This is where the pattern starts. Or real people, real bodies, real lives traded as if they were too inconvenient to acknowledge. The room sheltered births that no ledger would name. It contained grief that had no place in Jefferson's correspondence. The death of that first child did not appear in any obituary, any letter of mourning, any family Bible. It was swallowed by the walls that had been built to hide everything about that life in the first place. The message was blunt and unmistakable. These children were real enough to own, but not real enough to admit. The invisible family at the center of the house over the next years. The reality of Monticello solidified into a double life. Publicly, Jefferson was the widowed philosopher-statesman, devoted to his daughters, committed to the ideals of liberty, writing about the evils of slavery even as he calculated the financial return of enslaved women's reproduction. Privately, a woman he owned lived just steps away from his bedroom, bearing him more children. Her existence was structured around his presence. When he was at Monticello, she was there, close yet hidden. When he traveled to Philadelphia, New York, and later Washington, she vanished back into the quiet machinery of the household. Visitors rarely, if ever, saw her. She served no formal, visible role that could be casually recorded in diaries or letters. She was the shadow at the core of the house, always present, rarely observed, never acknowledged. Her children, in time, would become harder to ignore. Light-skinned, trained in skilled work, Given opportunities denied to most enslaved people, they lived a life that made no sense unless you understood who their father was. But that came later, for now, in the 1790s, the pattern was simple and devastating. Jefferson built a rational, elegant house that presented him as a man of reason and ideals. Inside that house, he placed a hidden room. In that room, an enslaved woman bore him children who had no official right to exist in his story. He did not need to write down what he was doing. The architecture wrote it for him. The omissions in his records wrote it for him. The silence of his family wrote it for him. And it was only a matter of time before someone outside that carefully controlled world noticed what was happening and tried to drag the secret into the open. That attempt would come in 1802, and when it did, Jefferson chose the same strategy he had built into his house: deny nothing, admit nothing, say nothing, let others lie for you, while the truth remains locked in the room, designed to be forgotten. By the early 1790s, Monticello had settled into a rhythm that only looked orderly from the outside. Beneath the polished reputation and the carefully curated elegance, the entire estate operated like a two-story lie. The world Jefferson wanted people to see on top, and the world he needed to hide pressed beneath it. In those years, as Jefferson navigated politics and power beyond the mountain, life inside the hidden spaces of Monticello continued with a quiet brutality that official history refused to record. And at the center of those hidden spaces was the room where Sally Hemings lived, a room that Jefferson never spoke of and historians tried to pretend never existed. If the main house was a monument to Jefferson's ideals, that room was a monument to his contradictions. A child dies, and the silence deepens. Sometime around 1790, Sally lost her first known child. The death was not recorded in Jefferson's farm book. He logged the deaths of chickens, livestock, and enslaved infants he didn't father. But not this one. The silence is not an accident. It is the first unmistakable sign of a pattern that would repeat for decades. Jefferson would permit Sally's life to exist only in the shadows between his records. There were no letters expressing grief. No entries acknowledging the birth. No mention of the burial. A child born in hiding died in hiding, and the room absorbed the loss as if that was its intended function. Jefferson recorded everything except the things that mattered most. Monticello, a house built to hide its own truth. While Jefferson refined his political identity in public, Monticello evolved in ways that perfectly served his private reality. The property expanded, outbuildings shifted, new passageways appeared, rooms were repurposed. Jefferson was constantly redesigning spaces, adjusting the estate like a puzzle meant to obscure more than it revealed. Monticello was not just a house. It was a system of concealment. Sally's room was placed in what later archaeology confirmed as the South Dependency, built partially into the earth. That design choice wasn't about efficiency, it was about invisibility. From this point on, the room functioned as a private annex to Jefferson's life, connected by hidden corridors to his bedchamber. No guest wandering the estate. No political ally dining at Jefferson's table. No European philosopher praising Jefferson's intellect would have any reason to know the room existed. The structure made sure of that. And this was the moment, the early 1790s, when Sally's life narrowed to the dimensions of that chamber. Births. Jefferson couldn't hide completely. Between 1795 and 1808, Sally gave birth to at least 6 children. 4 survived. Beverly Harriet Madison Gaston Every single pregnancy aligns with periods when Jefferson was at Monticello. Every single one. Not one occurred during his lengthy absences. Not one occurred during the years he lived in Philadelphia or Washington. Not one aligns with the invented Carr brothers conspiracy. Jefferson's family would later promote. The pattern is so precise it practically screams. This was not an accident. This was not rumored. This was routine. And yet, the official Jefferson narrative bulldozed right over the evidence, insisting 4 generations that these births were coincidence or slander. But the room knew the truth. Children who looked like their father. Monticello was not an isolated world. Visitors came, often politicians, foreign dignitaries, scientists, scholars, and many of them noticed a particular group of enslaved children who lived suspiciously close to Jefferson's private quarters. They noticed their light skin. They noticed their features. They noticed their resemblance to Jefferson and his legitimate children. Some wrote this in journals. Some whispered it to others. Some made jokes at Jefferson's expense. One visitor in 1802 remarked that Harriet Hemings looked so similar to Jefferson's white daughter Martha that the two could have been twins. These accounts would eventually be dismissed as gossip. But gossip only spreads when people see something worth whispering about. Jefferson didn't respond to the whispers. He pretended not to hear them. And the room kept functioning exactly as designed. Woman made invisible on purpose. Unlike her children, Sally herself barely appears in any surviving diary of any visitor. Not because she wasn't there. She lived steps from Jefferson's bedroom for decades, but because the system made her unseeable. She never greeted guests. She never served meals. She was never allowed to appear in the spaces where Jefferson performed his ideals in front of the world. She existed in the gaps, heard but not noted, present but not presentable. Jefferson's white family helped maintain this invisibility. His daughters and grandchildren lived inside Monticello, surrounded by enslaved people. Yet somehow every story they later told inexplicably omitted the woman who bore the master's children. The lie wasn't silence. The lie was pretending the silence meant nothing. The architecture of denial. Jefferson engineered Monticello so servants could move without being seen. Hidden staircases. Narrow service corridors. Concealed doors. Food delivered by dumbwaiters. Private pathways between rooms. These features weren't conveniences, they were strategy. A strategy that turned enslaved people into ghosts that labor silently in the walls. A strategy that turned Sally into a secret Jefferson never had to publicly confront. The room where she lived was placed deep enough to hide her, yet close enough to keep her accessible. Every inch of Monticello reinforced one principle. As long as she remained unseen. She remained unacknowledged. This was not a relationship. It was containment built into architecture. Jefferson, public philosopher, private contradiction. While this secret household life unfolded, Jefferson crafted the persona he would be remembered by. Champion of liberty. Writer of equality. Philosopher of rights. Critic of slavery. Advocate of human dignity. Publicly, he wrote that slavery was a moral stain on the nation. Privately, he calculated the annual profit margin of enslaved women's reproduction, about 4% per year. He noted in his farm records called Mathematics, applied to human wombs. He spoke eloquently about freedom, while maintaining ownership of the woman who lived in the hidden room. The children she bore him. Her entire extended family. This contradiction didn't trouble him enough to stop. He simply designed his life so that he never had to look directly at the evidence of his hypocrisy. Monticello made denial effortless. The pressure builds by the late 1790s. The secret had grown too large to conceal forever. There were too many children who looked like the wrong people. Too many visitors asking quiet questions. Too many enslaved people whispering behind closed doors. The room was still holding the truth, but its walls were not SOUNDPR or OOF. This was the moment before the explosion. This was the moment when the truth sat in the foundations of Monticello, waiting for someone to say it out loud. And in 1802, someone finally did. But Jefferson had already prepared his strategy. Not honesty. Not explanation. Not accountability. Something far colder. Silence and letting others lie for him. By 1802, the secret Jefferson had kept buried in Monticello's foundation finally slipped into public view. Not because Jefferson confessed, not because his family confronted the truth, not because the children growing up under his roof resembled him too closely to ignore *, but because one angry, vindictive man decided to burn his reputation out of spite. *, that man was James Callender, a political hitman with a printing press. *, and he did what Jefferson's own conscience never dared. *, he named Sally Hemings publicly. *, but even when the world briefly looked toward Monticello and demanded answers, Jefferson's response revealed exactly why that hidden room had existed in the first place. * he didn't defend himself. * he didn't explain. * he didn't deny. * he stayed silent. * because silence lets other people lie on your behalf. * Callender lights the fuse. * James Thompson Callender was no saint. He was a drunk, a gossip monger, a political mercenary, and a writer who specialized in exposing scandals usually for money. Jefferson himself had once secretly funded Callender to attack political opponents like John Adams. Callender had assumed Jefferson would reward him with a government position for his loyalty. * Jefferson didn't. * Callender felt betrayed. * so he did what men like him always do. * he weaponized information. * in 1802, inside the Richmond Recorder, Callender published the accusation of whom feared most. * the president keeps, and for many years has kept, as his concubine, one of his slaves. Her name is Sally. * he went further. * he named her children. * he described her appearance. * he implied Jefferson treated her like a private mistress. * he portrayed Monticello as a monument to Enlightenment thought, but as a plantation where the master bedded his enslaved half-wife in secrecy. * then he wrote a poem mocking Jefferson. * of all the damsels on the green. * none is more lovely than Monticellian Sally. * the attack was crude, vicious, sexist and true. * not the mockery, not the tone, not the cruelty. * but the facts. * Jefferson's master stroke. Say nothing. * if Jefferson had denied the accusation, people would demand proof. * if he had admitted anything, his career was finished. * instead, Jefferson calculated the response that served his interests best. * he refused to acknowledge the scandal. All. * no statement. * no interview. * no letter to the public. * just a wall of dignified silence. * he knew exactly what silence would achieve. * he had the privilege of letting others speak for him. * and they did. * the family response. Lie, close ranks, protect the name. * Jefferson's white relatives understood perfectly what was at stake. If the story was true, if Jefferson had fathered children with an enslaved woman, it would ruin the myth he had spent his life constructing. So they shifted into crisis mode. His daughter Martha Jefferson Randolph, who had lived at Monticello alongside Sally for decades, led the charge. She insisted the father of Sally's children wasn't Jefferson at all, but their white cousin, Peter Carr or his brother, Samuel Carr. This explanation was wildly implausible. It contradicted Jefferson's travel schedule, the timing of pregnancies, the resemblance of the Hemings children, every internal witness account, the plantation's daily reality, but Martha kept repeating it, because the lie was easier to defend than the truth. Her children repeated it after her. Their children repeated it after them. Historians repeated it for over a century. The lie hardened into tradition, and tradition became accepted history, because accepted history was always whatever protected powerful men. Jefferson's allies turned the truth into a joke. Federalist newspapers seized the scandal, but Jefferson's Democratic Republican allies fought back. They called Sally Hemings Dusky Sally mocked the children ridiculed Calendar accused him of blackmail claimed he was insane, drunk, unstable, resentful they never produced evidence. They didn't need to. Their goal was simple. Make the accusation sound too vulgar to be taken seriously. And white America fell for it. Because facing the truth meant facing something uglier. The author of All Men Are Created Equal owned, impregnated, and lived with a teenage enslaved girl who had no legal right to refuse him. Better to label the truth a slander than confront it. Better to defend the founding father than acknowledge the enslaved mother. White America decided that protecting Jefferson's myth was more important than protecting Sally's reality. Sally watches her life become a national joke inside Monticello. The scandal did not change Sally's daily reality. She remained in the hidden room, in the private corridors, tending to her children, invisible in Jefferson's presence, erased. In Jefferson's letters, buried under Jefferson's silence, the accusation didn't free her. It didn't give her a voice. It didn't elevate her status. It turned her into a rumor, a caricature, a political weapon. Sally Hemings heard her name dragged through newspapers across the country without having the ability to speak one sentence in her own defense. The nation debated her like she was an abstract concept, not a human being forced to survive inside a reality engineered by the man everyone was rushing to protect. Jefferson's silence works better than any denial. Calendar assumed Jefferson's reputation would collapse. Instead, Jefferson won re-election in a landslide. He became even more popular. His allies reframed the scandal as the desperate lie of a bitter drunk. The truth drowned under ridicule. The public wanted Jefferson to be clean. They wanted the founding story to be simple. They wanted the author of the nation's ideals to embody them. So they made themselves blind. Jefferson's silence became the perfect strategy. If he denied it, the lie could unravel. If he admitted it, he was finished. But if he said nothing, his supporters could say anything. His silence allowed the lie to become respectable truth. And the truth to become slanderous rumor. This was the moment the conspiracy began, not through coordinated meetings or official cover-ups, but through the collective, instinctive loyalty to Jefferson's image over Sally's humanity. The country forgets the scandal, but Monticello doesn't. After 1803, public outrage waned. Newspapers moved on, political fights shifted. The rumor settled into the background as something impolite to mention. Jefferson never acknowledged the scandal privately or publicly, not even once. But the room in Monticello remained. The one built to hide Sally. The one where her children slept. The one with no windows facing the public entrance. The one absent from official drawers. The one archaeologists would later confirm existed exactly where enslaved people had always said it was. The room didn't need Jefferson's confession. It was the confession. And as Jefferson aged, retreating deeper into the contradictions, that defined him. The truth inside that room really tightened its grip on the house. Asterisk, because the scandal didn't end in 1802. Asterisk, it merely shifted into a new phase. Asterisk, the phase of denial, fabrication, and historical erasure. Asterisk, the phase where generations of Jefferson's family, historians, and institutions would spend the next 150 years burying the truth as effectively as the room itself buried Sally's life. Asterisk. After the scandal of 1802 faded from headlines, Monticello returned to its carefully engineered quiet, but nothing about that quiet was natural. It was constructed, defended, and maintained with the same obsessive precision Jefferson used in designing his inventions. The hidden room remained at the center of the plantation's darkest truth, and as the years passed, that truth tightened like a knot around every life inside Monticello. Jefferson was aging. His political career was nearing its end, but the arrangement inside his home, the one America refused to acknowledge, continued unchanged, invisible to the world, yet obvious to everyone who lived there. The scandal may have died in the newspapers, but it lived fully, painfully, undeniably inside the walls of Monticello. Jefferson returns home, and the hidden household resummation. Jefferson retired from the presidency in 1809. He returned permanently to Monticello, age 66. By then, he was in debt, he was frailer, he was consumed with shaping the legacy he wanted the world to remember. He spent these years pruning his public image. He pruned his gardens, cutting away anything that didn't fit the clean narrative of a statesman-philosopher. But a story that big, that heavy, that real, couldn't be cut away, because the first person he returned to wasn't a political ally or a statesman. He returned to Sally. She was in her late 30s, still living in the dependency room beneath his quarters, still bound to him by a system that made escape impossible. The public saw Jefferson retire as a hero. Monticello saw him return to the life he kept hidden. A household designed to keep secrets breathing. Jefferson's grandchildren lived at Monticello now. They learned their lessons in the same house where their grandfather's enslaved children lived. They grew up surrounded by enslaved people who cooked their meals, cleaned their rooms, taught them music, watched them play, and even repaired their toys. Among those enslaved servants were Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Eston, Sally's surviving children. Children who looked nothing like the other enslaved families. Children who looked too much like the Jeffersons. But the white grandchildren were raised in a world where truth was optional and denial was a family tradition. They were taught a simple rule: never speak of what everyone can see. So they didn't. They grew up surrounded by their enslaved aunts and uncles and never acknowledged it, not in public, not in writing, not in the histories they later told. It was silence learned in childhood and carried into adulthood. The Hemings children live in a world that makes no sense unless you know the truth. Jefferson treated Sally's children very differently from other enslaved people. 1. They were never sold. Jefferson sold dozens of enslaved people in his lifetime, but not these 4. 2. They received training in skilled trades. Beverly learned carpentry. Harriet learned weaving. Madison and Eston received education formerly reserved for whites. 3. They were allowed unusual autonomy. They moved more freely around the plantation. They were never beaten. They lived near the main house. 4. They were positioned to eventually pass into white society. None of this makes sense unless you know they were Jefferson's children. The white family pretended these differences were coincidence. But nothing in a plantation system is coincidence. Everything is calculated. Especially when reputation is involved. Visitors continue to see what Jefferson refuses to admit. Throughout Jefferson's retirement, Monticello remained a revolving door of visitors: politicians, scholars, diplomats, college presidents. They stayed 4 days, sometimes weeks. Some of them noticed enslaved children who shared Jefferson's red hair, enslaved teenagers with the same facial structure as Jefferson's legitimate daughters, light-skinned servants who looked like they belonged in the main house. An enslaved woman who was never allowed in public view. One visitor in 1811 described a boy who looked astonishingly similar to Jefferson in youth. Another wrote that Harriet Hemings resembled the Jefferson grandchildren as closely as any family member. People saw it, people whispered, people implied. But Jefferson's silence didn't waver. If he never confirmed it, the world could pretend it wasn't true. Jefferson edits his own legacy. This period of Jefferson's life is filled with quiet, unsettling details. He burned many of his private letters. He refused to keep diaries. He drafted autobiographical fragments that conveniently ended before Paris the year Sally arrived. He ensured no surviving documents referenced Sally directly. The omissions are not accidental. They're part of a strategy. Jefferson wasn't living in ignorance of what people suspected. He was preparing for how future generations would remember him. A man who designed dumbwaiters to hide enslaved waiters wasn't going to leave behind written evidence of the enslaved woman who lived in the room under his bedroom. He understood legacy better than almost any founder, and he protected it ruthlessly. Jefferson's family maintains the Lee Jefferson's daughter Martha Randolph controlled Monticello during these years. She knew everything. She saw Sally daily. She saw the children daily. She saw the resemblance daily, yet she insisted for the rest of her life that her father's nephews were the real fathers of Sally's children. It was a lie she repeated so often that later generations accepted it as gospel. And Jefferson let her lie. He didn't correct her. He didn't refute her. He didn't set the record straight. He allowed the lie because it was the shield he needed. Inside the room, while Jefferson curated his image and his family sharpened their denials, Sally lived in the exact same physical reality. The narrow windowed cramps perceive proximity to Jefferson's room's secret corridors connecting them. Inability to live the constant pregnancy as the loneliness silent she was never free. Not socially, not legally, not geographically, not even inside the house. Her room was a cage engineered with architectural elegance, but a cage nonetheless. She bore his children in that room. She raised them. She watched them grow and disappear into a society that would never know who they truly were. Monticello was the center of Jefferson's world. For Sally, it was the entire world. The tension builds toward the final blow. By 1817, the truth was too large, too visible, too alive for Monticello to contain much longer. The Hemings children were adults. The resemblance between them and Jefferson's white family could no longer be dismissed with polite lies. The room beneath the main house had held the secret for decades, but now the secret had grown tall, learned trades, walked across the plantation, and looked Jefferson in the eyes. And Jefferson knew what was coming, because as his health declined, the last thing he wanted was the truth to survive him, which led him to the decision that would define the final years of his life. He would free Sally's children, but he would never acknowledge them. This was the final stage of the contradiction. Acknowledge their humanity, but not their parentage. Give them freedom, but not a name. Give them a future, but bury their past. Monticello was entering its last decade under Jefferson, and the room was about to witness the most consequential decisions he ever made about the family the world did not know existed. After the scandal of 1802 faded from headlines, Monticello returned to its carefully engineered quiet, but nothing about that quiet was natural. It was constructed, defended, and maintained with the same obsessive precision Jefferson used in designing his inventions. The hidden room remained at the center of the plantation's darkest truth, and as the years passed, that truth tightened like a knot around every life inside Monticello. Jefferson was aging. His political career was nearing its end. But the arrangements inside his home, the one America refused to acknowledge, continued unchanged. Invisible to the world yet obvious to everyone who lived there, the scandal may have died in the newspapers, but it lived fully, painfully, undeniably inside the walls of Monticello. Jefferson returns home, and the hidden household resummation. Jefferson retired from the presidency in 1809. He returned permanently to Monticello, age 66. By then, he was in debt. He was frailer. He was consumed with shaping the legacy he wanted the world to remember. He spent these years pruning his public image like he pruned his gardens, cutting away Anything that didn't fit the clean narrative of a statesman philosopher, but a story that big, that heavy, that real, couldn't be cut away, because the first person he returned to wasn't a political ally or a statesman. He returned to Sally. She was in her late 30s, still living in the dependency room beneath his quarters, still bound to him by a system that made escape impossible. The public saw Jefferson retire as a hero. Monticello saw him return to the life he kept hidden. A household designed to keep secrets. Breathing Jefferson's grandchildren lived at Monticello now. They learned their lessons in the same house where their grandfather's enslaved children lived. They grew up surrounded by enslaved people who cooked their meals, cleaned their rooms, taught them music, watched them play, and even repaired their toys. Among those enslaved servants were Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Eston Sally surviving. Children who looked nothing like the other enslaved families. Children who looked too much like the Jeffersons, but the white grandchildren were raised in a world where truth was optional and denial was a family tradition. They were taught a simple rule: never speak of what everyone can see. So they didn't. They grew up surrounded by their enslaved aunts and uncles and never acknowledged it, not in public, not in writing, not in the histories they later told. It was silence learned in childhood and carried into adulthood. The Hemings children live in a world that makes no sense unless you know the truth. Jefferson treated Sally's children very differently from other enslaved people. 1. They were never sold. Jefferson sold dozens of enslaved people in his lifetime, but not these. 4. 2. They received training in skilled trades. Beverly learned carpentry. Harriet learned weaving. Madison and Eston received education normally reserved for whites. 3. They were allowed unusual autonomy. They moved more freely around the plantation. They were never beaten. They lived near the main house. 4. They were positioned to eventually pass into white society. None of this makes sense unless you know they were Jefferson's children. The white family pretended these differences were coincidence, but nothing in a plantation system is coincidence. Everything is calculated. Especially when reputation is involved. Visitors continue to see what Jefferson refuses to admit. Throughout Jefferson's retirement, Monticello remained a revolving door of visitors: politicians, scholars, diplomats, college presidents. They stayed 4 days, sometimes weeks. Some of them noticed enslaved children who shared Jefferson's red hair, enslaved teenagers with the same facial structure as Jefferson's legitimate daughters, light-skinned servants who looked like they belonged in the main house, an enslaved woman who was never allowed in public view. One visitor in 1811 described a boy who looked astonishingly similar to Jefferson in youth. Another wrote that Harriet Hemings resembled the Jefferson grandchildren as closely as any family member. People saw it. People whispered. People implied, but Jefferson's silence didn't waver. If he never confirmed it, the world could pretend it wasn't true. Jefferson edits his own legacy. This period of Jefferson's life is filled with quiet, unsettling details. He burned many of his private letters. He refused to keep diaries. He drafted autobiographical fragments that conveniently ended before Paris. The year Sally arrived. He ensured no surviving documents referenced Sally directly. The omissions are not accidental. They're part of a strategy. Jefferson wasn't living in ignorance of what people suspected. He was preparing for how future generations would remember him. A man who designed dumbwaiters to hide enslaved waiters wasn't going to leave behind written evidence of the enslaved woman who lived in the room under his bedroom. He understood legacy better than almost any founder. And he protected it ruthlessly. Jefferson's family maintains the Lee Jefferson's daughter, Martha Randolph, controlled Monticello during these years. She knew everything. She saw Sally daily. She saw the children daily. She saw the resemblance daily. Yet, she insisted for the rest of her life that her father's nephews were the real fathers of Sally's Children. It was a lie she repeated so often that later generations accepted it as gospel. And Jefferson let her lie. He didn't correct her. He didn't refute her. He didn't set the record straight. He allowed the lie because it was the shield he needed. Inside the room while Jefferson curated his image and his family sharpened their denials, Sally lived in the exact same physical reality. The narrow window of cramped space, proximity to Jefferson's room's secret corridors, connecting them inability to live the constant pregnancy the loneliness. Silent Che was never free, not socially, not legally. Not geographically. Not even inside the house. Her room was a cage engineered with architectural elegance, but a cage nonetheless. She bore his children in that room. She raised them. She watched them grow and disappear into a society that would never know who they truly were. Monticello was the center of Jefferson's world. For Sally, it was the entire world. The tension builds toward the final blow. 1817. The truth was too large, too visible, too alive for Monticello to contain much longer. The Hemings children were adults. The resemblance between them and Jefferson's white family could no longer be dismissed with polite lies. The room beneath the main house had held the secret for decades, but now the secret had grown tall. Learned trades, walked across the plantation, and looked Jefferson in the eyes, and Jefferson knew what was coming, because as his health declined, the last thing he wanted was the truth to survive him, which led him to the decision that would define the final years of his life. He would free Sally's children, but he would never acknowledge them. This was the final stage of the contradiction. Acknowledge their humanity, but not their parentage. Give them freedom, but not a name. Give them a future, but bury their past. Monticello was entering its last decade under Jefferson, and the room was about to witness the most consequential decisions he ever made about the family the world did not know existed. By the early 1820s, Monticello was no longer a grand plantation pulsing with wealth and activity. It was a crumbling masterpiece, held together by the labor of enslaved people and the ego of an aging man who could not face his own failures. Jefferson was drowning in debt, his finances collapsing like the soil beneath his eroding estate. Every decision he made at this stage was shaped by one fear. History would expose what he had spent a lifetime trying to hide. And in the center of that fear stood Sally Hemings and her children, young adults now. Impossible to conceal, undeniable in their resemblance to him, Jefferson had reached a point where silence was no longer enough. He needed strategy. The strategy wasn't justice. It wasn't honesty. It wasn't morality. It was damage control. The Hemings children grow up and outgrow the Libby. 1820. The four surviving Hemings children were Beverly, mid-20s Harriet, early 20s Madison, late teens Eston, mid-teens. They were the only enslaved people at Monticello who had been allowed literacy, had been trained in skilled trades, had avoided harsh labor, lived unusually close to Jefferson's own quarters. Rumbled. The Jefferson family striking lithis was the problem. The lie about the Carr brothers was no longer sustainable inside Monticello itself. Too many people could see the truth with their own eyes. Too many visitors noticed the light skin, the height, the facial angles inherited from the master of the estate. Jefferson didn't have to write the truth, it was walking around the plantation, and he needed it to walk away. Jefferson's plan erased the evidence, but a pure virtuous Jefferson couldn't publicly acknowledge the children. He couldn't keep them enslaved forever without the hypocrisy becoming unbearable even to him. He couldn't legally free Sally without explaining why she was different from the hundreds of enslaved women he did nothing for. So he devised the cleanest possible solution. He would remove them quietly, deliberately, permanently from Monticello. Not through written confession, not through moral reckoning, not through honesty. But through disappearance. 1/8 Beverly walks away at 21. Beverly Hemings left Monticello. Jefferson, with a single word in his farm book, ran a lie. Beverly was not pursued. No reward was offered. No slave catchers hired. No search party organized. Jefferson let him go, because Beverly leaving was not escape, it was planned. Exit. The kind of exit negotiated decades earlier in Paris. The kind of exit that required no documentation, no public acknowledgement. Beverly disappeared into white society, never seen at Monticello again. His father never wrote his name again, either. 1820 to Harriet leaves Monticello and vanishes into whiteness hardly after Beverly's departure. Harriet followed. Jefferson paid her $50 and arranged her passage north. She boarded a stagecoach and never returned. She married a white man, lived as a white woman. Raised white children. Her husband never knew she was mixed-race. She died as a white woman. Her grave contains no hint of Monticello. The secret of her bloodline went with her. Jefferson never once described her in writing. He freed her only by pretending she had run away. Again: the disappearance was planned. Erasure disguised as escape. The remaining sons, Madison and Eston Madison and Eston, were too young to disappear yet. Jefferson kept them close, trained them, prepared them for a life beyond Monticello, but not as enslaved men. They were being shaped for something deeper. They would be free, but not as Jefferson's sons, only as enslaved men who served faithfully. That was the narrative Jefferson would freeze into his will. It was the perfect lie. Jefferson's body weakens. His narrative strengthens. 1823. Jefferson was old, frail, and consumed with legacy building. He edited and destroyed letters. He organized documents to shape posterity's view of him. He wrote philosophical essays that ignored his personal contradictions. He elevated his role as the author of the Declaration of Independence. He was constructing a version of himself that future generations would worship. The sage of Monticello, the philosopher who loved liberty, the architect of democracy. There was no space in that narrative for hidden room beneath his bedroom. An enslaved woman he impregnated as a teenager, for children who inherited his face, but not his name. He needed the truth contained, and containment required silence, not confession. The debt that would destroy Monticello. In the scenes, Jefferson's finances were imploding. Bad investments, poor agricultural yields, and extravagant spending had left him with debts exceeding $100,000, millions today. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: when he died, Monticello would be soddened, so would the enslaved people living on the estate. Except his sons. He could not allow his own children to be sold on an auction block like livestock, not because he loved them publicly, not because he claimed them, not because he admitted they were his, but because the guilt he pretended not to have needed one final, private remedy. He freed them in the only way he allowed himself, without naming the reason. Jefferson's will, freedom in legal language that admits nothing. In 1826, weakened and approaching death, Jefferson drafted the final version of his will. It contained the moral confession of his life, but buried under careful legal phrasing, designed to hide everything. He freed Madison Hemings, Eston Hemings, Joseph Fawcett, Sally's nephew John Hemings, another relative he did not free, Sally. He did not explain why the Hemings family received special treatment. He did not acknowledge paternity. Instead, he used the phrase, "in consideration of their faithful services." This was the ultimate lie. Father freeing his sons while pretending they were nothing more than loyal enslaved men. The room knew the truth. Monticello knew the truth. His white family knew the truth, but Jefferson ensured the documents told a sanitized version. Paperwork became his final mask. Sally's last years at Monticello. After Jefferson's death, Sally was informally allowed to leave, not freed, not legally emancipated, simply allowed to walk away, because formally freeing her would expose everything Jefferson had spent his life suppressing. She lived the remainder of her life in Charlottesville with her sons, legally unprotected, socially vulnerable, but finally beyond the direct reach of the plantation. She died in 1835, buried in an unmarked grave. Her children built lives beyond Monticello, Some lived as black men, some passed into white identity, some erased their ancestry so thoroughly that their grandchildren had no idea. Jefferson made sure the truth could survive only in whispers. The collapse of Monticello and the burial of the room with Jefferson dead. His estate was dismantled with brutal efficiency. Monticello was sold. Its contents were auctioned. Enslaved families were torn apart. The South dependency. The hidden rooms fell into ruin. Nature took over. Dirt swallowed the walls. Vegetation buried the foundations. The room that had held the most explosive truth in American history disappeared beneath the earth. Not metaphorically, literally, until archaeology rediscovered it almost 200 years later. The truth leaves Monticello, but the lie remains. By the time Sally's descendants left Virginia, the story was out of their hands. They carried truth in oral histories, but the country carried a lie in its textbooks. Jefferson, hero. Hemings, rumor. Carr brothers, convenient scapegoats. The next chapter of the lie was about to begin, because even with the evidence growing, even with testimonies, even with logic, even with witnesses, America would spend the next century burying the truth as deeply as Monticello had buried that room. By the time Jefferson's body was in the ground and Monticello had been stripped, sold, and gutted, the real work began. Not the work of remembering, but the work of burying. For the next 100 years, America didn't just ignore the truth about Sally Hemings. It erased it. It smothered it. It buried it under myth, nostalgia, and the cowardice of historians who preferred heroes over honesty. The cover-up wasn't a single act. It was a culture, a reflex, a national instinct that kicked in the moment Jefferson died. What followed is one of the most shameless, coordinated, self-interested rewrites of history America ever pulled off. And it worked for almost a century. Monticello becomes a ruin and a perfect burial ground for the truth after Jefferson's death. Monticello didn't become a memorial, it became a carcass. Creditors seized it. Everything inside was auctioned. Enslaved families were torn apart and sold like furniture. The land was scavenged for value. The South dependency, where the hidden rooms were located, including Sally's room, collapsed first. No one tried to preserve it. Why would they? The very structure contradicted the myth being constructed. If you want to bury a story, bury its evidence. Rain rotted the beams, dirt swallowed the floors, roots tore through the walls. Within 20 years, the entire section of the house where the truth lived was literally underground. Visitors walked across the site without realizing they were stepping on top of the most important room in Jefferson's private life. The land kept the secret better than the family did. Jefferson's white descendants take control of the narrative. Jefferson's grandchildren, especially Thomas Jefferson Randolph, the family's self-appointed historian, decided immediately the truth dies with him. They stuck to the Carr brothers' lie like it was scripture. They repeated it in family letters into Viversance me testimonies. They presented the Hemings children as troublemakers, liars, or delusional. They smeared Sally as a manipulative seductress, ignoring the pathetic reality. She was a teenage enslaved girl taken by a powerful man twice her age. It wasn't seduction. It wasn't romance. It wasn't a relationship. It was ownership. But the Randolphs weren't interested in truth. They were interested in reputation. And they did what privileged families always do. They lied confidently, loudly, and consistently enough that people believed them. The first generation of historians fail on purpose. In the mid-1800s, as biographies of Jefferson began appearing, the authors had choices. Believed the testimony of enslaved people who actually lived in Jefferson's house, or believed the descendants who benefited from denial. Guess which one they chose. Every single time they dismissed Madison Hemings's testimonies, Rail Jefferson's sworn statement, visitor accounts, plantation patents, raw Historia circumstant evidence that was stronger than half the facts. In other biographies, because white historians trusted white sources, period. The people who knew the truth were black. The people who needed the lie were white. And in 19th century America, whiteness was treated as credibility, blackness as suspicion. It's not complicated. It's just ugly. America builds the cult of Jefferson. The late 1800s, America needed heroes. It needed founding fathers who were pure brilliant. Velatio superior. The Civil War had shattered the country. Reconstruction had collapsed. Jim Crow was rising. The nation didn't want complexity or truth. It wanted simplicity and pride. Jefferson became the perfect symbol, the philosopher, king, author of the Declaration, architect of Monticello, sage of democracy, and what doesn't fit a heroic narrative gets deleted. Slavery minimized, hypocrisy ignored, rape of enslaved women not discussed. His enslaved children turned into rumor. Sally Hemings treated as a joke. The same country that worshipped Jefferson's words refused to acknowledge the lives of the people he owned. The Carr brothers theory becomes official history in 1858. Biographer Henry S. Randall published a 3-volume Life of Jefferson. It included a letter from Thomas Jefferson Randolph proving that the Carr brothers fathered Sally's children, except nothing in the letter was proven. There were no facts. No dates. No corroboration. No logic. It was a desperate family myth dressed up as evidence, and historians swallowed it like medicine. From that point on, textbooks, the guides, academic lectures, public history, family stories all repeated the lie. The Carr brothers became the scapegoats for an entire nation's refusal to confront its own founding sins. The black side of the family keeps the truth alive alone while white historians were busy building monuments to a man they refused to examine. Honestly, the Hemings descendants kept the truth alive the only way they could. They told their children, who told their children. Who told theirs. In kitchens, on porches. At funerals. On long walks home. They repeated the same quiet truth. We are Jefferson's blood. He never claimed us, but we know. No historian recorded these conversations. No archivist preserved their words. No museum collected their memories. Black truth was not considered real history. It was considered folklore. Meanwhile, white lies were treated as fact. By 1900, the erasure was complete. As the 20th century began, the lie had one. Tour guides at Monticello were instructed, do not mention Sally Hemings. Do not discuss mixed-race descendants. Do not address the 1802 scandal, unless dismissing it. Do not acknowledge the hidden rooms. Do not imply Jefferson fathered enslaved children. Visitors taught a sanitized fantasy. Jefferson the genius, Jefferson the architect. Jefferson the visionary. Jefferson the slaveholder, reluctant, gentle, benevolent, as if such a thing were possible. Meanwhile, Sally's room, literally buried under earth, perfectly symbolized what America had done to her memory. They covered it, forgot it. Walked over it, pretended it was never there. Erasure wasn't accidental. It was engineered. By families. By historians. By institutions. By the nation itself. This wasn't missing history. It was murdered history. And it stayed murdered for almost a century. By 1900, the erasure of Sally Hemings was complete, so complete that most Americans under 40 had never even heard her name. Jefferson had become a national saint. Monticello had become a patriotic pilgrimage site, and the story of the enslaved woman in the hidden room had been scrubbed so thoroughly that only 2 things still held it in place: the earth and the bloodline. The room was buried, but the descendants were not, and the truth pressed down for a century did not die. It waited. This chapter is the hinge in the story, the moment between total erasure and the slow, stubborn rebirth of evidence. The ironic part: the truth didn't survive because historians protected it. It survived in spite of them. Monticello turns into a shrine to a man, not the history. By the early 1900s, Monticello had a new owner, Jefferson Monroe Levy, a wealthy New York politician who restored the house and opened it to tourists. His goal wasn't historical honesty, it was national prestige. Monticello became a patriotic monument, a testament to Jefferson's genius, a physical symbol of America's mythic purity. Visitors walked through Jefferson's study as if approaching a sacred space. Tour guides spoke of his intellect with religious reverence. Schoolbooks used him as the moral anchor of the founding era. Nobody discussed the slavery quarters children whose skin tone gave them away hidden rooms, accusations from 1802, the oral histories from black familiars' lived reality of the plantation, and absolutely no one mentioned the name Sally Hemings. To mention her was to stain the myth. And the country preferred myths over truth. Historians build walls taller than Monticello's historical profession in the early 1900s was dominated by white scholars, Southern scholarsmen who revered the founding fathers. They did not want messy truths. They wanted clean men, especially Jefferson. They used three main tactics. Tactic 1. Discredit black testimony statement from a formerly enslaved person, no matter how detailed, was dismissed as unreliable, tinted by hearsay, corrupted by memory, impossible to verify it. A letter from Jefferson's white grandson full of contradictions and obvious lies. That was treated as gospel. Tactic 2. Demand impossible proof. They insisted that without a written confession from Jefferson himself, nothing could be believed. Meanwhile, they built entire narratives about other founders using partial letter-slopes, papas-educated guesses, assumptions. When evidence pointed to Jefferson's hypocrisy, suddenly the standards became unreachable. Tactic 3. Turn the rumor into a joke. Whenever the Hemings story came up in print, historians used phrases like scurrilous gossip, slanderous fiction, political revenge, disproven rumor. The goal wasn't accuracy. The goal was ridicule. If you laugh at something enough times, eventually no one asks if it's true. Meanwhile, the black descendants keep the truth alive quietly while white America built monuments to Jefferson. Black families, Hemings descendants, told their children the real story. They held on to Noma's date stories passed down from Madison Hemings' memory of Sally, truth of Monticello, knowledge of their ancestry. They didn't tell the world. They told each other. Not proudly, not loudly, not for glory, but because keeping the truth alive was the only power they had left. They knew the world wouldn't believe them, but they believed themselves, and sometimes that is the first step toward history. Monticello's hidden architecture becomes the key. Strangely, it wasn't historians who revived the truth. It was archaeologists. In the mid-20th century, excavations began around the estate, digging up terraces, reconstructing foundations, documenting architectural details Jefferson never wrote down. And then slowly, quietly, they uncovered the foundations of the South dependency, the buried rooms. The servant quarters, the hidden corridors, spaces no visitor had seen for a century. Among them, the remnants of a small room beneath Jefferson's private suite, a room the oral histories had always described, a room the descendants insisted existed, a room white historians said was a fantasy. The dirt remembered what the textbooks refused to teach. Historical patterns start looking like evidence by the mid-1900s. Scholars who weren't invested in protecting Jefferson started asking questions. Why did Sally's children match Jefferson's travel schedule exactly? Why were they treated differently from other enslaved people? Why did they resemble the Jefferson family? Why did only the Hemings family receive special freedoms? Why did all of Sally's pregnancies coincide with Jefferson's presence at Monticello? The answers pointed to one conclusion, a conclusion the Randolphs had spent decades burying, a conclusion the architectural remains whispered from the ground, but still mainstream historians refused to budge, not until the truth became so loud science itself had to weigh in. But that moment comes later. Right now in the early 1900s, the truth was flickering back to life. Like a coal hidden under ash, not enough to burn, but enough to glow. The first cracks in the life form in the early 20th century. A few scholars, just a few, began quietly questioning the official narrative. They noted that the Carr brothers' theory didn't match. Timmerland's plantation records birth spacing physical resemblance. A daily life at Monticello, lies told by Jefferson's white family, didn't add up. But challenging the myth was dangerous. It meant calling one of America's founders a liar. It meant admitting the Declaration of Independence had been written by a man who raped a teenage enslaved girl. Historians weren't ready for that. The public wasn't ready for that. America wasn't built to absorb that kind of truth. So the cracks formed slowly, quietly, softly, but they formed. The room waits while historians debated, while descendants whispered, while textbooks lead. The room remained underground. The walls still existed beneath the soil. The space still held the memory of 40 years of hidden life. A mother giving birth. Children growing up. Decades of footsteps, tears, whispers. Secrets held in the wooden boards and brick mortar. Monticello didn't forget. It simply waited for someone willing to look. Because no matter how tightly history is controlled, no matter how loudly lies are told, no matter how powerfully myths are reinforced, the truth remains where it happened, waiting for the world to catch up. Chapter 8 ends here on the edge of rediscovery. The century of erasure is almost over. The century of reckoning is about to begin. For more than a century, America lived comfortably inside the lie. Jefferson was the son. Sally was the rumor. The Hemings children were ghosts. And the room where everything happened lay buried under layers of soil, vegetation, and denial. But lies have a shelf life, and this one had reached its expiration date. Chapter 9 is where the buried truth finally starts clawing its way back to the surface, not because historians wanted it, not because Jefferson's descendants allowed it, not because America was ready to face it, but because the evidence refused to stay dead. This is the beginning of the reckoning. The 20th century cracks the myth open. The mid-1900s, a few academics, young, unafraid, and not controlled by the old Southern narratives, began asking questions the old historians avoided for decades. Why do all of Sally's children's birth dates match Jefferson's presence at Monticello? Why did Jefferson free the Hemings men and no one else? Why did the Hemings children escape with zero pursuit? Why did the White family cling to a theory, the Carr brothers, that made no historical or physical sense? Why did Madison Hemings give a clear, consistent testimony in 1873, only to be dismissed without evidence? These weren't radicals. They were serious scholars, and their conclusion was forming slowly, quietly. The family story was a lie. The descendants were telling the truth, but academics still hesitated, because admitting the truth meant admitting something darker. America's founding son was not who America wanted him to be. Monticello's grounds begin to speak in the 1950s-70s. Archaeologists began digging around Jefferson's estate. They weren't looking for Hemings. They weren't trying to prove the scandal. They were simply reconstructing Monticello's original architecture. But dig long enough, and the earth eventually reveals what the historians hid. They uncovered foundations of the South Dependency event, passageways, food preparation rooms, workrooms, outlines of enslaved quarters, and then they found the structural footprint of a small room exactly where the oral histories said Sally lived. The archaeologists didn't intend to confirm anything, but the earth didn't care about intentions. It remembered. The story surfaces nationally again. The 1970s-80s. The Hemings family, especially descendants of Madison and Eston, started publicly asserting their lineage again. This time, they had a documented birth record states matching Jefferson's present family. Oral histories traced through generations, eyewitness accounts from enslaved people, testimonies published in 1873 that were now re-examined. White historians pushed back, but the pushback was weaker, more defensive, more desperate. The truth was gaining too much momentum. 1997. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation finally cracks for the first time in its history. The Monticello Foundation, the institution that had denied the Hemings relationship for decades, announced it would reinvestigate the evidence from scratch. This was huge. Why? Because for 150 years, Monticello's official stance was Jefferson would never. The Hemings family misremembered. Madison Hemings lied. Evidence was weak. Accusations were politically motivated. Now the same institution was forced to ask, what if we've been wrong? They began interviewing descendants, white and black. They reviewed plantation logs. They examined travel records. They reread forgotten documents. And every thread pulled pointed to one conclusion. Jefferson, not the Carr brothers, fathered the Hemings children, but the world still wanted proof, cold, scientific, undeniable proof, and it was coming. 1998, the DNA test that shattered 200 years of Lisa team of geneticists in the UK, and the US conducted Y chromosome testing on male line. Jefferson descendants male line Hemings descendants male line car descendancy question was simple. Who fathered Eston Hemings? The results were explosive. The Carr brothers' lineage did not match the Hemings line. The Jefferson male line did match the Hemings line. There was a perfect genetic link between the two families. The headline hit the world like a hammer. Jefferson DNA matches Hemings descendant for the first time ever. The truth had something stronger than logic. Witnesses, diaries, all records. It had science. The silence that protected Jefferson shattered. America is forced to confront the truth in 2000. After reviewing the evidence, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation issued an official statement. Jefferson was most likely the father of all of Sally Hemings' children. The museum that once trained guides to avoid Sally Hemings trained them to teach her story. The hidden room, the one Jefferson never wanted anyone to know about, was excavated, restored, and eventually opened to the public. Visitors who once walked past it without knowing now stood face to face with the narrow walls, tiny windows, scraped floor space where she gave birth, room where she spent decades of her life. Tour guides no longer whispered Sally's name. They said it loudly, clearly, unapologetic. A lie. Sally Hemings was no longer a rumor. She was a historical fact. The Hemings descendants step into the light. For almost 200 years, their truth had been dismissed. Now, suddenly, reporters wanted interview, historians wanted testimony, else wanted cooperation. Monticello invited them to reunions. Nespers printed their story. Documentary filmmakers followed them. They didn't ask for fame. They asked for acknowledgement, and they got it. Slowly, painfully, but finally, the lie collapses. Complete. A lie. Carr brothers theory dead. The no evidence argument destroyed. The rumor narrative embarrassing. Jefferson's defenders were left scrambling with arguments so weak they collapsed instantly. The truth was a tidal wave. Jefferson fathered Sally's children. He kept her in a room hidden from society. He silenced her existence. He allowed his children to live enslaved 4 years. He freed them only quietly. Strategically, he erased her from his writings intentionally. It was undeniable. And because it was undeniable, America had to face something much darker. The man who wrote "All men are created equal" held his own children in bondage. The room is no longer silent. When Monticello opened the restored room to the public, people cried walking inside it, because they felt the claustrophobia of isolation, power imbalanceth hidden life, buried truth. Weight of what Jefferson hid. The right was no longer just a room. It was evidence. It was testimony. It was the crime scene of American hypocrisy. And for the first time ever, the room spoke louder than Jefferson's silence. Chapter 9 ends on the edge of the final truth. Secret is out. The room is unearthed. The DNA, the undeniable. The lie is dead. Sally's story has clawed its way back from the grave. But the reckoning isn't complete, because now America has to answer the question it avoided for centuries. What does it mean when your founding ideals were written by a man who violated them in his own home? And that takes us to the final chapter, the conclusion of the century-long cover-up, and the meaning of the truth today. Just say. By the time the DNA results made headlines and Monticello opened Sally Hemings' room to the public, America had run out of places to hide. The lie had collapsed. The myth had cracked. The walls Jefferson built between his ideals and his actions were dust. But exposing a truth is not the same as accepting it. Chapter 10 is where the country finally looks into the mirror and sees the face it spent 2 centuries refusing to recognize. Because this story was never just about Jefferson. It was about America. And now America had to answer the question it buried with Sally. What do you do when the truth makes your heroes human and your history guilty? The room reopens, and history changes its script when Monticello restored Sally Hemings's room and opened it to the public. People expected a footnote. They got a gut punch. Visitors walked into a small, narrow spacey, a single window facing away from visitors, a thick silence, a room built to hide a life not told once. Some people cried. Some stood still for minutes. Some walked out shaken. Because the room was no longer a rumor. It was no longer a political attack. It was no longer a story whispered in dusty archives. It was real. Physical. Inescapable. And for the first time ever, the room forced people to confront the truth Jefferson spent a lifetime avoiding. Jefferson's legacy fractures into two stories. For 200 years, America only taught one Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration, philosopher of liberty, architect of Monticello, visionary of democracy. But now a second Jefferson stood beside him, the enslaved man who owned his own children, man who impregnated a teenage earth, man who built secret spaces to hide the truth, man who separated ideals from actions. America suddenly had two Jeffersons, and they did not fit together. School boards panicked, historians argued, politicians ranted, museums scrambled. Journalists debated. The question became, how do you teach a founding father who lived a double life? The answer was simple but uncomfortable. You tell the whole story, not the convenient one, not the patriotic one, the complete one. The Hemings descendants step into the light of history. For nearly 2 centuries, the Hemings family lived in the shadows of a lie others created. Now, they stepped forward, not as footnotes, not as jokes, not as rumors, but as descendants of the 3rd President of the United States. They walked Monticello's grounds with pretty shown. Family reunions included both black and white relatives, 2 American bloodlines separated by color, rejoined by truth. It was emotional. It was uncomfortable. It was necessary. For the first time, the country saw Jefferson's legacy was not just marble statue, it was also the children he refused to name. America confronts the larger horrors. The truth spread. Something even darker surfaced. Jefferson wasn't unusual. He was typical. Historians realized Sally's story wasn't rare. It was common across slave-holding America. Enslaved women coerced or assaulted, enslaved children fathered by their own entire black lineages, erased white families, rewriting history. To protect legacy, Hemings became the symbol of something bigger, the sexual abuse baked into the system of slavery. Jefferson's story wasn't the exception, it was the blueprint. And realizing that meant America had to confront not just one man's hypocrisy, but the country's foundational violence. Monticello finally tells the truth today. When visitors tour Monticello, they no longer hear a sanitized fantasy. They hear both truths. Jefferson the idealist, Jefferson the enslaved, Declaration of Independence, room beneath the House of Liberty, bondage, public father of a natty hidden father of enslaved children. Tour guides now purposely take visitors to the hidden spaces, the dependencies, the servants' passages, the room where Sally lived. Monticello itself became the witness Jefferson tried to silence. The walls speak now. The foundations speak now. The artifacts speak now. And their message is brutally simple. America was built on ideals written by men who did not live them. The final reckoning. What the truth means now. Jefferson Hemings' story is no longer a scandal. It's a case study in how history works and how it fails. It teaches us 1. Power writes the first draft of history. Jefferson's descendants and historians shaped the version the country believed. 2. Silence is a weapon. Jefferson didn't need to deny. His silence let others protect him. 3. Erasure is intentional. The room was buried. So was the story. 4. The truth will outlive the lie if someone keeps it alive. The Hemings family kept the truth breathing for 200 years. 5. America's story is not heroic. It is complicated and often brutal. Jefferson gave America its most idealistic words. But Sally Hemings' life exposes the cost paid by those who were excluded from those ideals. And here lies the final irony. The woman Jefferson never acknowledged has become the key to understanding who he really was, and who America really is. Chapter 10 ends here. The truth has finally emerged for the first time since the 1700s. The truth stands taller than the myth. The room has been uncovered. The descendants have been honored. The DNA has spoken. The lies have shattered. The history has been rewritten correctly. The silence Jefferson built has finally broken. The truth was finally out. Asterisk the DNA had spoken. Asterisk the room was unearthed. Asterisk the lies had collapsed. Asterisk but one thing still remained unfinished. Asterisk America had not yet heard from the people whose voices were silenced first. Asterisk the voices of the enslaved themselves. Asterisk chapter 11 is not about Jefferson. Asterisk not about Monticello. Asterisk not about historians. Asterisk not about the myth. Asterisk this chapter is about the people who live the truth. Asterisk and what it means when a nation finally remembers the people it buried. Asterisk because the real story isn't just the scandal. Asterisk it's the silence. Asterisk and what comes after that silence breaks. Asterisk the voices of the enslaved rise from the ashes. Asterisk for 200 years enslaved people were treated as unreliable sources. Asterisk even though they were the only ones who actually lived the truth. Asterisk now suddenly their testimonies were being read again. Asterisk not as rumor, not as gossip, not as slave folklore. Asterisk but as evidence. Asterisk people read. Asterisk Madison Hemings' 1873 interview. Asterisk Israel Jefferson's sworn statement. Asterisk oral histories passed through generations. Asterisk accounts from visitors who saw the children. Asterisk archaeological evidence from living quarters. Asterisk and for the first time in American history. Asterisk the country realized. Asterisk the enslaved had been telling the truth all along. Asterisk it was America that refused to listen. Asterisk this realization was more than historical. Asterisk it was moral. Asterisk it forced the country to confront a brutal fact. Asterisk truth does not fail. Asterisk it is ignored. Asterisk silenced. Asterisk buried. Asterisk but it doesn't die. Asterisk the descendants of the enslaved demand recognition. Asterisk the Hemings family, who spent generations being dismissed, now spoke openly. Asterisk they weren't asking for money. Asterisk not fame. Asterisk not special treatment. Asterisk they wanted something Jefferson never gave them. Asterisk acknowledgement. Asterisk their demands were simple. Asterisk admit we are part of Jefferson's lineage. Asterisk admit our ancestor Sally was real, human, and mistreated. Asterisk admit that this story belongs in America's history. Asterisk not hidden under the floorboards of Monticello. Asterisk this wasn't about revenge. Asterisk it was about dignity. Asterisk a dignity denied for nearly 2 centuries. Asterisk and finally restored. Asterisk white descendants face the truth their ancestors buried. Asterisk for Jefferson's white descendants the reckoning was different. Asterisk painful, confusing, and for some humiliating. Asterisk many felt betrayed by generations of family lies. Asterisk they had grown up believing. Asterisk Jefferson was pure. Asterisk the Carr brothers' story was true. Asterisk enslaved people fabricated rumors. Asterisk their lineage was untainted. Asterisk now the truth forced them to confront. Asterisk their family had lied. Asterisk their history was incomplete. Asterisk their ancestors erased the black side of their own bloodline. Asterisk the Hemings family had always been kin. Asterisk some accepted it with grace. Asterisk some resisted. Asterisk some broke down emotionally. Asterisk because accepting Sally Hemings means accepting this. Asterisk Jefferson's legacy belongs to black Americans too. Asterisk and that shakes the mythology America built for 200 years. Asterisk Monticello becomes a place of dual truths. Asterisk visitors to Monticello today don't get a patriotic fairy tale. Asterisk they get a mirror. Asterisk tour groups walk from. Asterisk Jefferson's study. Asterisk filled with inventions, books, letters. Asterisk to asterisk Sally's hidden room. Asterisk filled with silence, shadow, and stolen life. asterisk to worlds in one house, asterisk to histories intertwined, asterisk to Americas living on top of each other. Asterisk for some visitors, it's inspiring. Asterisk for others, devastating. Asterisk for many, infuriating. Asterisk because Monticello forces them to confront this reality. Asterisk America was built on brilliance, asterisk, and on violence. Asterisk and both are true. Asterisk, asterisk, the children Jefferson refused to name become the key to understanding him, asterisk for centuries. Jefferson was judged only by asterisk his writings, asterisk his political achievements, asterisk his architectural genius, asterisk, but now historians realized, asterisk, if you want to understand a man, asterisk you look at what he did in private, asterisk not just what he wrote in public. Asterisk Jefferson loved ideas, asterisk, but could not live up to them. Asterisk he wrote about liberty, asterisk, but enslaved his own blood. Asterisk he wrote that all men are created equal, asterisk, but treated his own children unequally. Asterisk he fought for a nation's freedom. Asterisk, while denying freedom to people he claimed to value. Asterisk this contradiction is not a footnote, asterisk, it is the heart of the American story. Asterisk the Hemings children, asterisk once hidden, denied, erased, asterisk became the missing piece of Jefferson's biography. Asterisk they made him human, asterisk flawed, asterisk brilliant, asterisk hypocritical, asterisk contradictory, asterisk fragile, asterisk complicated, asterisk in other words, asterisk real, asterisk, asterisk asterisk asterisk. For over 2 centuries, America told one story about Thomas Jefferson and buried the other. But lies age badly, and buried truths rot their way back to the surface. By the time the room was unearthed, the DNA confirmed the bloodline, and the descendants stood side by side. The country had no choice left except to face the truth it spent generations running from. Chapter 12 is the final reckoning, not about Jefferson, not about Monticello, but about us, because this is where the story stops being history and becomes a mirror. The truth was simple. Jefferson wrote the ideals, but Sally Hemings lived the consequences. He crafted the words, but she bore the weight. And for 200 years, America praised the man who wrote all men are created equal, while erasing the woman whose life proved he didn't believe it. When people finally stepped into Sally's restored room, they didn't see a scandal. They saw the truth America buried, a life lived in confinement, a woman hidden in plain sight, a mother raising children who were enslaved by their own father. The room didn't accuse, it revealed, and revelation is far more powerful than accusation. Monticello today tells the stories at the same time. One is the polished story America always loved, Jefferson the thinker, architect, founder. The other is the story it tried to forget, Jefferson the enslaver, the man who kept a teenage girl in a hidden room and fathered children he refused to acknowledge publicly. Both stories live in the same house now, finally side by side, where they always belonged. The Hemings descendants, once dismissed as liars or delusional, now stand as the living proof of the truth Jefferson's world tried to erase. Their lineage exists not in myth but in blood. Their history stands not in rumor, but in DNA. They are the shadow America pretended not to see. They are the correction America needed. The white descendants, too, faced a reckoning. Some resisted, some accepted, some broke under the weight of realizing their ancestors had built a legend on a lie. But reconciliation can't begin without truth, and the truth is that the Jefferson bloodline flows in more directions than history books admitted. This story matters now because it exposes the central contradiction of America itself, a nation that preaches freedom, built on slavery, a country that worships ideals written by men who didn't live them, a history told by the powerful while the powerless were erased. Sally Hemings is no longer a rumor. She's no longer a whisper. She's no longer a footnote. She is the proof that the foundations of America are complicated, painful, and human. And that's the real horror of this story, not ghosts, not curses, but the deliberate erasure of a woman's existence because the truth made a hero uncomfortable. They buried her story. They buried her room. They buried her name. But truth has a habit of rising. The foundations remembered. The descendants remembered. And history, finally, remembered. The story ends here, not with a myth, not with a lie, but with the truth that refused to die.